Welcome to Sab's podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest today, you've seen him here before, is Professor Marandi. He is a professor at Tehran University in Iran. Welcome back, Professor Marandi.
Hi, Sabrina. Thank you for inviting me.
So I'm sure, as you are aware, Donald Trump won the presidential election here in the U.S. And one of the things that he has gone on record to say, particularly during this campaign, is that he wants to destroy Iran's nuclear capability. He has since announced that he has added a number of warmongers and neocons to his cabinet, people like Marco Rubio, Elise Stefanik, who is very, very much a Zionist, and attacked the students that had the encampments at the universities here in the United States. And she also criticized the presidents of those universities. Just a number of people that are not good for someone that is claiming to be against the wars, which I tried to warn people that Donald Trump is not anti-war. Where does Iran fit in all of this? I'm curious to hear if Iran had a preference over one of these candidates or if they were against Kamala and Donald Trump. And how would Iran feel about Donald Trump possibly trying to destroy Iran's nuclear capability?
I think it's very fair to say that all along the analysis among the influential uh, people in Tehran is very close to your own, and that there's no real difference between Trump or Harris or Biden, and that the United States is uh, very much under the influence of the Zionist lobby. The Zionist lobby, of course, is comprised of Christians, of Jews, of secular people. It has nothing to do with any religion, but it is very powerful in the United States. And I am quite surprised that some of my own friends in the United States and in the West were hoping that Trump would be any different from Trump 8 years ago or Biden 4 years ago. I recall before the election 4 years ago, I was invited to a think tank, an American think tank, to discuss the the new Biden administration. It was after the election, or it was no, sorry, it was before the election. And this think tank, which is very close to the Democrats, and many of them joined the administration. The people there, it was online, it was during Corona. The people in the seminar were saying that Biden will remove the Trump sanctions against Iran through a presidential decree. And I said that he won't do it. And I'm sitting here in Tehran, and these people are very close to the Biden team. And then after the election, when Biden uh, was declared the victor, again, they invited me to another one of those seminars, and they said, okay, Biden will remove the sanctions. And again, I said, I do not see that happening. And ultimately, I was correct, even though I'm sitting here in Tehran and I have nothing to do with Washington and I have no insider information. The reason why I was right and they were wrong was I think that a lot of their analysis was based on wishful thinking. And I think the same is true with many of those people who voted for Trump. They wanted to believe that Trump had changed. But a person who uh, strangles other nations, who strangles Venezuela, who continued the dirty war in Syria, and who supported the genocide in Yemen, uh, or the sanctions, the American sanctions that were to strangle ordinary Iranians, that person is not going to change. I don't see any reason why people would think he would change. So Trump is going to be the same as Biden. And if Harris was elected, those I know I have friends again, I'm sure you do, many more than I, in the United States who are hoping that she would be different from Biden. They were choosing a few sentences here or there that she said that are attributed to her, just like some people who voted for Trump, hoping again beyond hope that she would change things. Neither of them were going to change the United States. The United States is controlled by very powerful forces that are not working in the interests of the United States. They're working for the interests of the Zionist lobby, for the military-industrial complex, and for very powerful elites. And it doesn't matter really to Iran. So this would be what my conclusion. It doesn't really matter to Iran whether Jake Sullivan is the national security advisor or anyone else, or whether the U.S. secretary. It doesn't. There's not going to be a difference between Trump's neocon Secretary of State or Biden's neocon Secretary of State or the hypothetical Harris Secretary of State. They're all going to pursue the same policies, and therefore Iran really doesn't have any. It didn't have any preferences whatsoever.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And I watched a lot of people get duped and they're freaking out now online, mainly on Twitter/X, that they're surprised he's adding these members to his cabinet. It's really interesting how people have ignored what happened in the previous Trump presidency. And that brings me also to this question about Iran. I read recently that Palestinians will not be allowed the right to return in northern Gaza. So this is a recent article that was published, which is what I think a lot of us have been predicting all along, is that the plan was for Israel to push them out and not allow them to return back to what is left of their home, for Israel to take that land, develop that land, and turn it into what they want it to be. My question is, when it comes to Iran, if the Palestinian people, those that are still alive in Gaza, are not allowed the right to return to northern Gaza, and Egypt obviously already has refugees there, and they said they cannot afford to take in the rest of the people that are in Gaza, then that brings up the question of Iran. And this is a question one of my viewers has been asking me before. Do you think that there's a possibility that when it comes to Palestinian refugees, would Iran intervene in any way, shape, or form when it comes to displacement of the Palestinian people? Or do they feel that they don't want to do that because that's what Israel wants to happen?
Well, it's worse than that. The Palestinians in northern Gaza are being exterminated. They've been surrounded, and the Israeli regime is not allowing any support, any food, any water into northern Gaza. And the West knows this. They're all a part of this conspiracy. Why do I say it's a conspiracy? Because when you have somewhere between 200 to 300,000 people who are surrounded and starving and being bombed day and night, if the West cared, you would have wall-to-wall coverage. You'd have rolling coverage on the BBC and CNN and the New York Times, but they're silent about what's going on in northern Gaza. So they are part of this extermination. And this is a very broad conspiracy. It's not like a conspiracy that a few people are, talking about behind closed doors. There's just a consensus that Netanyahu should be able to do what he wants to do. And some will complain about it. Every now and then you'll see something in CNN or maybe a 5-minute piece on the BBC. Someone may interview me and I may say a few nasty things for about 2-3 minutes. That may go viral, and but it will be news as normal. because they don't want to draw too much attention towards this extermination. So what is happening is a general genocide, a Holocaust across the Gaza Strip. But in the northern Gaza Strip, the extermination has taken new proportions, and this has been going on for quite a while. What Iran is doing is what it has always been doing, and that is that it is supporting the resistance in every way that it can. And that is happening. Just as Iran supported them in the past, they are supporting them now. We've seen the Israeli regime take significant casualties in Gaza, both yesterday and today. The Iranians will continue to support that. What the regime wants is the extermination of Palestinians or their expulsion from their land. And that is what Iran doesn't want to see, because ultimately the Israeli regime should not be able to win. And the Palestinian people, the people of Gaza, are resilient, and they're not leaving, because they know what happened in the Nakba in 1948. They were expelled and they were never allowed to return. The people of Gaza are overwhelmingly people whose parents, or they themselves, or whose grandparents were expelled. Gaza was a small town before the expulsion of the Palestinian people from Palestine. So these people actually own the lands around Gaza, and the southern part of Palestine belong to these people. So they know quite well that if they leave one more time, like their grandparents did, or their parents did, or they themselves did when they were young, that they will be living in misery for the rest of their lives. Iran will continue to support them. They'll continue to support resistance across the board. Sadly, Iran is the only country that is supporting the resistance, whether it's through Yemen or Lebanon or Palestine itself or Iraq or Syria. Iran will continue to do so, and Iran itself will punish the Israeli regime. As in the past, Iran will retaliate, and it will retaliate in a way in which, this time around, which will be very costly to the regime, and hopefully it will empower the resistance to be able to push back harder on the regime. The belief in Iran, the belief in Tehran, is that this war will end in defeat for Netanyahu and his regime. And even though it looks very dark, and even though roughly 100 people at least are being slaughtered a day, at least more than 100 people, I think, in Lebanon and in Gaza as we speak. Every day, roughly 50 people are being massacred in Lebanon. And the difference, by the way, between Lebanon and Gaza is that Western journalists are in Beirut. Western embassies are in Beirut, but they're completely silent. And that is another conspiracy. That, for example, the Israeli regime is bombing homes full of refugees. And they're bombing communities and families that are supportive of the resistance. And they are slaughtering women and children every day on multiple attacks in different parts of Lebanon. And these embassies know that. The American ambassador knows that. The British ambassador knows that. The Italian, they're all in on it. And instead of condemning the Israelis, what they're doing is they're conspiring against the resistance in Lebanon. Because the difference between Lebanon and Gaza is that the Americans have these fascist allies in Lebanon. For example, the Lebanese forces led by Samir Ja'ja, when the Israelis invaded Lebanon in 1982 and captured Beirut, back then there was no Hezbollah. Hezbollah was actually created as a result of the invasion of Lebanon in 1982. But when Israel captured Beirut in 1982, the Lebanese forces, this fascistic organization, they went into the Sabra and Shatila Palestinian camps in Beirut. I've been there many times. And with Israeli support, they slaughtered almost 4,000 women and children, ordinary people, within 36 hours. These are the US allies and Western allies in Lebanon. These are their allies. And these people right now, and Western embassies are working together to conspire against the resistance. So this is how sinister Western governments are. And Western journalists in Lebanon know that houses are being bombed and women and children are being bombed, but they'd use terms like Hezbollah targets or Hezbollah strongholds to deceive public opinion into thinking that these are like militants or soldiers or commandos. No, these are just women and children being slaughtered. But Western journalists, because they are at least legacy media journalists, they're stenographers, they'll do whatever their overlords tell them to do. They're hiding this reality from the public. But that's exactly what's going on. So for Hezbollah, it's actually more difficult than for Hamas, which controls, despite the horrors, it still controls Gaza. Lebanon is much more complicated. So Hezbollah always has to be wary about being stabbed in the back by these allies of the United States and of the Zionist regime. But every day, roughly 50 civilians are being massacred in Lebanon, probably more in Gaza. I don't know about the numbers right now, but let's say 100, 150 ordinary people are being slaughtered every day in Gaza and in Lebanon. And we also saw a couple of days ago a massacre in Damascus where they slaughtered a family. We see regular murders in the occupied West Bank, which goes unnoticed by the Western media, the legacy media, of course. But despite this these dark images that we see that prevent people often from sleeping at night, and some people complain to me about my tweets because I tweet a lot of these images, disturbing images. And the reason I do it is not, it really, it wears me down just looking at this footage. But I always want to remind people that, even it's ongoing. Nothing has stopped. Even when we sleep, when we're eating, when we're having fun, when we're in class, when we are on vacation, during the weekend, it's always happening. They're killing day and night, morning, afternoon, night, midnight. But despite all this darkness, I am convinced, and many people here are convinced, that the resistance will overcome. And I think special, that I have special admiration for the people of Lebanon because they willingly made the sacrifice. The people of Gaza had to defend themselves. They've had to defend themselves for decades. But Hezbollah and the resistance and its supporters, their supporters are comprised of uh, Christians, uh, Muslims from all sects, Druze, right? The Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, the resistance, which is, behind Hezbollah and with Hezbollah, um, they've made these sacrifices willingly for the last year. They knew that ultimately the regime would go after them, but they also knew that they could not stand idle as this Holocaust is taking place in Gaza. So these are dark times, but I have no doubt that despite what's happening, the resistance will succeed. The Israeli regime will fail. And Trump, he will face the same fate as Biden and Harris. His name will go down in history as an enabler of genocide, and which is going to be far worse than anything that George Bush did or Obama did, for one reason, and that is that we're seeing it carried out in front of our eyes. When it came to Iraq, we heard horrible stories. When Yemen, the dirty war in Syria, in Libya, it was mostly stories that we heard from secondhand sources. Now we're seeing it. We wake up in the morning and we see it happening, and we see the BBC trying to justify it. In the afternoon, we see it happen again. We see CNN trying to justify it. In the evening, we see more scenes. We see the Washington Post trying to justify it. At night, we're going to bed. It happens again. We see the Guardian trying to justify it. Everyone is trying to justify it. But what they've done is not only has the Israeli regime destroyed its image across the board and exposed itself as an illegitimate regime, worse than apartheid South Africa, as Desmond Tutu once said. When he visited Palestine, he said that what's going on in Palestine is far worse than what was going on in South Africa, Bishop Desmond Tutu said this. And what's going on in Palestine today is far worse than what he saw when he went to Palestine. So the Israeli regime has destroyed itself basically in the eyes of the international community, but so has the United States. So has the West. And they will see the consequences in the coming days, months, and years. That's why the world is turning towards BRICS. That's why the world is turning away from the West and the United States, because the hypocrisy that we're seeing in Gaza is beyond belief. It's beyond anything we've seen before. There have been nasty people in human history. People like Hitler, people like Churchill. I mean, Churchill, regardless of Dresden, but what he did to Asia, Africa, to our region in West Asia was no less than Hitler. It's just people with darker complexions were being, killed and starved in India and elsewhere. But our own local despot, evil despot, Saddam Hussein, who attacked Iran and killed hundreds of thousands of his own people, even he is not as evil and ugly as American and Western leaders, because he did not slaughter people and pretend that he was the good guy. He did not lecture us about human rights. He did not slaughter Iranians or Iraqis and tell us how to behave and tell us how to imitate him and his people as decent human beings. That's exactly what the U.S. government does. That's what exactly what U.S. and Western elites do. They say we're the civilized world, and yet they commit genocide. They say they're the free world, yet their media is absolutely quiet when the people of northern Gaza are being exterminated.
Well said. I 100% agree with what you're saying there. And I'm curious, like, especially now that Western corporate media isn't covering the protest as much as they were last year. Are people in Iran aware that people in the US are still protesting against the Israeli government? Are they aware that a number of young voters, in particular with this presidential election, it was revealed that the reason why Kamala Harris did so poorly with voters between the ages of 18 and 44 is because of Gaza. It was the Gaza issue that made a lot of the younger voters not show up to support Kamala Harris. In fact, going all the way back to Bill Clinton, she has received the least amount of support from that age group. So it's very apparent, but there was an article about this recently that it was the Gaza issue that prevented a lot of younger people from coming out to support Kamala Harris. Are people in Iran aware that in the US, people are still protesting, and that particular a lot of the younger people chose not to participate and support the Democratic Party, particular the Biden-Harris administration, because of the genocide?
I don't know how it is across the country, but among people who are politically aware that I know, that is something that more or less they recognize. There is Iranian media does show protests against the genocide in the United States and in Western countries and elsewhere in the world. Uh, and on Iranian media, you do have Western guests who appear with simultaneous translation on talk shows where, they speak about these issues and they create that awareness. I think that there is a distinction being made in Iran between the elites in the United States, the media, and ordinary people. People do the polls that are carried out in the United States about young people being opposed to the genocide and demanding or supporting an embargo on weapons for Israel. That sort of thing those sort of things are published in Iran. And I should add, and I think probably since your audience is a very politically aware audience, I should add that Iranians do make a distinction between Zionism and Judaism. We have a Jewish community in Iran. We have a Jewish MP in Iran. Uh, the Constitution says that there must be a Jewish MP in parliament. Even if there's only one Jew in the country, that person has to. If there are no Jews, probably they have to import a few so that one becomes an MP. But we have a small Jewish community. We have kosher restaurants and synagogues, and we have a number of Christian MPs as well. The general, I mean, there may be some who are ill-informed or angry, but the narratives that I hear among elites in Iran or people of influence or in the Iranian media is one where there's a very clear distinction made between Zionism and Jews and Christians and ordinary Americans, and the protesters being led by, or protests that were led, for example, by Jewish young Jews in the United States. I recall one of them in the news in Iran on television being showed when they occupied. I think they were protesting in a metro station in New York, if I'm not mistaken. My memory doesn't serve me well, but that was shown here on Iran. So yes, that I think those who are politically aware do make that distinction, but I really can't comment in the broader sense about what goes on across the country.
Professor Marandi, how do you feel about those that are Muslim voters in the U.S. that decided to support Donald Trump? Now, there was a split over this. The exit poll from CARE shows that Jill Stein received the majority of the Muslim vote in the United States. The third party candidate, Donald Trump, came in second, and Kamala Harris came in last. How do you feel about some of the Muslim voters that decided to vote for Donald Trump because they believe that he would be better on this particular issue with Israel? It was weird to me. I have to be honest in the beginning, because the first thing I thought of was the Muslim ban. I thought of Donald Trump moving the embassy. I thought of the rhetoric that has come from Donald Trump about Palestinian people, about people in the Middle East that are not Israeli in particular. But he went to Dearborn, Michigan, which has the largest Arab American population in the United States. And Kamala Harris chose not to visit Dearborn after everything, after all the demands that came from Muslim voters for a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, and of course, an arms embargo against Israel. She never stepped foot in Dearborn. A few days prior to the election, Donald Trump went to Dearborn and was not, from what I understand, not really particularly welcomed by a majority of people in that community. But however, there were some who decided to host him there, and he said that he would end it. And now, to me, when he says he's going to end it, that means he's going to let Netanyahu and the IDF come in and just kill everybody. That's my perception of ending it. But some did not see it that way. Some did assume that he would end the war, and that he would do things that would help, in particular, both communities. How do you feel about that? Those who decided to support Donald Trump?
I don't watch movies anymore. I haven't watched movies for uh, quite a few years. And unless I'm trapped on an airplane and there's a screen in front of me and I have nothing else to do, I may watch something, and usually I don't watch it till the end. But when I was young, there were these movies that had this repeating, they had like these like someone would be walking in the desert and he'd see this mirage. He'd think it's an oasis, and they'd walk towards the oasis, and then it would disappear. And I think for a lot of, it's not just Muslims. I don't think it's a Muslim issue. Uh, I think it's many young Americans, many Americans want to believe out of desperation that something that Harris said here may mean that she will do something different, so they voted for her. And some who voted for Trump said, well, something that he said there, you know, that's what his real intention is, or a tweet that his son did here, or something that someone said there. That's you know, in hope that that's what's going to happen. They voted for Trump or Harris. And I don't think it's just the Muslim community. I think it's many people. Some have contacted me and asked me what to do, and I said I wouldn't vote for either of these two people. I'd either vote for no one, or I wouldn't vote, or I'd vote for an alternative candidate, Jill Stein, for example. Although some have told me, we won't vote. I said, I wouldn't vote for these two people. Jill Stein, of course, I was disappointed in what she said about Syria. I think it's very clear that the dirty war in Syria, uh, in Libya, the genocide in Yemen, the war in Iraq, all of these were basically for the interests of the Israeli regime, to the detriment of not just the people of Syria and Libya and Yemen and Iraq, but to the detriment of the people of the United States. Trillions of dollars have been wasted on these wars and dirty wars. I was disappointed in her. I think she probably said that under duress. But anyway, but I would have voted either for her or for some other candidate. Cornel West deeply disappoints me when he speaks about Iran. I think he's under the influence of someone who lives with him. But I would have voted either. I've told people not to vote for these two, but I understand why some people, Muslim or non-Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Hindu, whatever, would vote for them in the hope that they would be different from expectation. But I think that was again, it's like one of those old movies where you're walking towards this mirage, and probably it's a mirage, and you're never going to reach water, but you just you just hope maybe there's a 1 in a million chance that it will be different. I don't see any difference between Trump today and Trump 8 years ago. The world has changed. That is the good news. The empire is collapsing. The USS Titanic is sinking. And I think in the long run, that's better for the American people. But in any case, I think the United States is going to have the next few years are going to be very difficult for Americans. I think if Trump wants to engage in war with Iran or Russia or China, that his supporters will turn against him, because the United States is simply not the United States of 2001. It's not the United States of the 1990s. And I don't think anyone will accept war. And today, Iran is much more powerful than it was years ago. And so is Russia, and so are other countries. So the same thing to do would be for the United States to rethink its foreign policy. But I just don't see that happening under Trump, or potentially, or if Harris had won, I don't think it would be any better. I think they're both the same. Can it get worse? Can Trump be worse than Biden? Carrying out a Holocaust for over a year, giving the Israeli regime weapons day and night and ammunition, an air bridge to just bomb kids and to bomb women and to slaughter people in Syria and in Libya, in Lebanon and Gaza, and they even bombed the West Bank now. A week or two ago, they bombed the West Bank, the occupied West Bank. So I don't see it getting worse. There is a potential, of course, just like under Biden, for Trump to make a military move against Iran, but that's not something that he can get away with. The Iranians will hit back very hard, and he will not win in any conflict with Iran. The Iranians have prepared themselves for this, for such consequences. They've been preparing themselves for ever since 9/11, ever since invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, when Iran was surrounded and much weaker than it was today, and much more isolated. Remember, back then, Russia and China were much weaker. Countries across the global south were weaker. The US was much more powerful. Iran was preparing itself back then, and the United States didn't invade Iran, not because they liked Iran, but because they knew the price would be too high. Today, the price would be infinitely higher. So Trump may threaten Iran, and he is an impulsive person. So we will take that seriously in Iran, but he cannot win in any war. It would be a defeat for him, and I think it would bring about a situation inside the United States that could lead to instability.
Well said. I mean, I just it terrifies me the fact that there are politicians in this country that have touted we need to go to war with Iran, like Lindsey Graham, like Marco Rubio. Like it's very I just want to like grab them and say, "Are you insane? Like what is wrong with you?" And I think another thing that I wanted to point to as well. What does happen to Israel in the end? Well, what is the ultimate prediction about what will happen to Israel? Because even some Israelis have risen up to protest against Benjamin Netanyahu. It seems that they have become very frustrated with the fact that the hostages are not back. And I even question if I question at this point if that will ever happen because Hamas has been very clear about permanent ceasefire. We'll give you the hostages back. It was just announced recently that Joe Biden said that he would not entertain this at all. That is completely off the table to even try to have some type of negotiation to get those hostages back, which points to what I predicted before, which is that it wasn't really about the hostages. I've just always felt that way. It wasn't really about that. But ultimately, in the end, whenever this does end, what happens to Israel? Because the ICJ has already confirmed that Israel is an illegal state, that it should not be there. What happens?
Well, those who are protesting against Netanyahu, they are mostly from, oh, well, almost exclusively from the liberal faction of the Zionist camp. And they are almost half the population. I don't know the exact numbers, but they are Zionists. They too view Palestinians as subhuman. I mean, everyone is subhuman to them. We're all Amalek. But the anti-Zionist Jewish community in Palestine is not all that influential. There are a number of Jews in Palestine that are anti-Zionist and who believe um, in equality among all people. But it's different from what you have in the United States. In the United States, you have lots of, especially young Jews whose politics are different from their parents, and you have many Jews, older Jews, maybe I don't know what percentage they are, but who are anti-Zionist. I have quite a few Jewish friends, religious and non-religious, who are anti-Zionist. Have always been anti-Zionist, and from my understanding, their numbers have increased, or at least a lot of people, a lot of Jews who were taught to be supportive of the Israeli regime no longer support it, or they're just getting on with their lives. But Israel is different because the regime it trains these kids from childhood. Uh, you know, I recall the former mayor of New York saying that Palestinians are taught from the age of 2 to kill Americans, and Giuliani, saying all that rubbish. But there's a lot of evidence out there that shows how racist Israelis are towards Palestinians, and how in kindergarten and how at schools they're trained to hate Palestinians. So I'm not optimistic about the opponents of Netanyahu in that sense, but I do think that the divisions inside the Israeli regime are very deep and dangerous. And I think that they will have consequences after a ceasefire. I think Israel is going downhill very fast. There for a number of reasons. One is that Israel has lost the war. It has lost in Gaza. We have to remember that in the past, when the Israelis invaded Egypt, they'd go all the way across the Sinai, and they even reached the Suez Canal. Now, after well over a year, they have failed to take Gaza, and they're giving casualties as they have during the last 2 days. Even more significant is the fact that in Lebanon, as I mentioned earlier, in 1982, they reached Beirut in less than a week, and they captured Beirut. Now it's getting near to 2 months. they have failed to take a single village and hold it in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah has been hammering them across the border between Lebanon and Palestine. And they failed to make any inroads. And actually, the Hezbollah has basically prepared itself for the Israelis to come in, because that's when they will, we will see the major ambushes coming from all sides. The Israelis haven't been able to penetrate into Lebanon for almost 2 months now. They've lost the war against Hezbollah. Hezbollah has shown itself to be the ultimate military power in West Asia. Despite, as I said, having traitors conspiring against them in Beirut with Western embassies. In the conflict with Iran, all we have to do is compare the footage of Iranian missiles striking Israeli targets and the alleged the Israeli strikes on Iran. I was in Tehran. When I woke up, it wasn't the sounds of explosions that woke me up. It was RT and Al Jazeera that woke me up to say you're being attacked. So I, went and looked out the window. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. And actually, those places that were allegedly being hammered in Tehran, the Parchin, which is to the east of Tehran, there were no explosions there, and you can see it from Tehran because, first of all, it was after midnight, and second of all, Tehran is a mountainous area, and Parchin is lower than much of Tehran, so you can see Parchin from many areas in Tehran. We didn't see any of these huge explosions, or any explosions for that matter, in Tehran. So the Israelis and the Iranians are going to strike back. They're going to strike back very hard. They're going to strike back significantly harder than they did last time. So in the exchange with Iran, the Iranians have the upper hand. But most importantly, Sabrina, most importantly, the Israelis are detested across the world. They have lost their legitimacy. Just today, an Iranian living in Europe told me that young Iranians who've been in the West, and Iranians in the West, many of them who've been trained to hate Iran and to see the West as their savior and as supporters of human rights, their views have changed, and they're saying, these people are carrying out genocide, and then saying that Iran is the bad guys. People who went to the West and because they thought Iran was a terrible place. Now they regret it. So Israel has destroyed its image. The West has destroyed its image across the world. And the Israeli regime, and what he was telling me was that many young people are reading about Palestine, whereas they never did so before. Just like in Vietnam, when things began to get bad in Vietnam, people started reading about the history of Vietnam and Ho Chi Minh and the French and what was. So they began to see a more realistic picture of what was going on in that part of the world. And as the protest movement grew in the United States, greater awareness was created. And this is what we're seeing across the world. A lot of people know about the Nakba. They never heard about it before. They always thought that, okay, well, Israel is there and there are these Palestinians and there's a fight over a piece of land, and that's it. Now they see things very differently. I think that the consequences in this regard are much more significant than the defeat in Gaza or the defeat in Lebanon or the defeat against Iran. But I would also add that we still have a long way to go. I think that there will be a ceasefire. I think that the Israeli regime will be forced to accept a ceasefire. Hezbollah will not accept a ceasefire that is not acceptable to Hamas. So that is out of the question. There's no way that that Hezbollah is going to relinquish Gaza. They're going to continue to hammer the Israelis until Hamas and the resistance and Islamic Jihad get what they want, which is a permanent ceasefire with the conditions that the United States put forward, that Biden put forward, and he lied repeatedly, and so did the Jake Sullivans of the world. That's why I say Trump is no better or no worse. Jake Sullivan, and of course Netanyahu's personal lawyer, the current U.S. Secretary of State, Blinken. They put forward the proposal. They kept lying about Israel being supportive of the proposal. Hamas accepted it to a large degree. Israel said we don't. That what Hamas accepted back then, Iran accepts, Hezbollah accepts, and Israel will ultimately have to accept that. There's no option for the Israeli regime. Netanyahu can bark all he wants. He can go and make all these grand claims about what he's going to do to the Palestinian people, but he ultimately will have to accept that ceasefire. And once that ceasefire has been accepted, and at one point or another, that I think is going to be the beginning of the end. Oh, we're already seeing the beginning of the end of the Israeli regime for the reasons that I mentioned. But I think that it's downhill from after that, because many in Palestine many will think about leaving. The Israeli regime has no future. No investment will ever be safe there again. And the image of the regime is so horrible that many people will not want to invest there again. I was at a conference in Beijing about a while back, a few months ago, and I discussed this. I said, well, what about Chinese investors? The Chinese, they were saying that Chinese companies are never going to invest in Israel. So I think that will be the beginning of the end of the Israeli regime. And it's to the benefit of Jews, it's to the benefit of everyone, just like apartheid South Africa. When Western journalists like to tell me, do you want Israel to be destroyed? Because they want to create this image that we want to overrun the land and slaughter everyone. It's sort of what they do to the Palestinians, which is okay. They're worried that the Iranians want the same thing to happen to the Zionists. But I always say it's just like apartheid South Africa. We want apartheid South Africa to be destroyed. We want South African white supremacist regimes to be destroyed, and they were destroyed. But are white South Africans dead? Were they driven into the sea? They're there. Actually, they're doing quite well. It's actually still a very unfair system in South Africa, because the same people who were empowered, and that's where Nelson Mandela made grave mistake by not creating greater equality. But that's another discussion. They are doing quite well in South Africa, and compared to the African majority or the different minorities that exist in the land. So Israeli regime is detrimental to the interests of Jews, because the regime is equating Zionism to Judaism. So many people think that because of what the Israelis are saying and because of what Western media is saying, that these atrocities are being carried out by Jews when they're being carried out by Zionists. And those Zionists are Christian, Jews, secular, all sorts of different people. So they are hurting the credibility and the image of the Jewish people. They are destroying the image of the West. The West, if they want to compete with other powers, and Israel has destroyed their image across the global South. The global majority, people have, the West is now marginalized. So and imagine if there was no Israel. Imagine if there was no Israel. What would prevent Iran and the United States and ordinary people across this region from having good relations with Western governments and Western countries? What would prevent it? It's always been about Israel. The problem has always been the Israeli regime. But in any case, I think we're approaching the end of this regime. It won't happen in a week or a month or a year, but I think that we are in the beginning of the end. This is the beginning of the end, and it's going to continue to move towards its collapse, which is, as I said, I think it's something that Jews, Christians, Muslims, everyone should welcome.
One more question for you, Professor Marandi. When Benjamin Netanyahu was at the UN, he held up this map, and I'm pretty sure you've seen this before. This idea that he can create this land bridge through Israel. And he had two maps. One, he said, was the blessing, which included the land bridge. And he said this will help with trade, et cetera. So it's all about, I just see this as capitalism. And then the second map that he had said the curse. And he said basically that Iran was a curse, that these countries were in the way of the land bridge. How do you feel about that statement there from Benjamin Netanyahu saying that Iran is the curse?
You know, Sabrina, I have been in media for a while, and I don't enjoy it. I'm actually, I said once before elsewhere that I'm a very private person, and I was brought up. I was very shy actually in high school and in university, uh, at university, but this was sort of imposed upon me. Even being a university professor was not what I wanted to do, but for reasons that are not for now, that's the path I had to take. So I was a very private person. I had to go in front of class, and now I have to go in front of and speak to your audience. Now it's easier for me, but I was a very different person in the past. So I've been in the media for a long time, despite my, my the fact that that's not something that I really wanted to do. And I have been defending Iran. And I've been defending the resistance and the axis of resistance. And whether it was, and because I always believed it was right. Not that Iran is a utopia, not that, uh, you know, uh, Iran is this fantastic place which is unbelievably good. But I always felt that what Western media was saying, what was being said about Iran among Western elites was completely inaccurate and often very dishonest. And so I have always tried to defend Iran, even during very difficult times like the riots, which you and I discussed when we first had our first conversation. I explained what happened. And, um, and of course, Syria, the dirty war in Syria. Back then, many people, when I was saying that the reason why Iran is preventing the fall of the Syrian government is because this dirty war is being carried out by the Americans, being led by the Americans to undermine the country for the sake of the Israeli regime. Things have changed a lot. Iran and the resistance are now, within just a year or two, have become very popular. You'll be surprised how many people contact me from across the world who tell me, their views of Iran have changed completely. Their views of Hezbollah, their views of the region have changed completely. And people, for example, who argued with me over Syria tell me you were right. And people who argued with me over Yemen or Iran or Hamas or Hezbollah say you were right. I'm not saying that this is anecdotal, but I have a very strong feeling that the mood has changed. In Iran, it has changed. A lot of students of mine, at least 3 or 4 students, have come to me personally, people who said that they were involved in protests and riots a couple of years ago. They said we were wrong. One of them actually said to me, how do I make up for it? And I said, just study hard and don't be fooled by Western narratives. What else can you do? But the point is that Netanyahu can say whatever he wants. He has exposed himself, and Western regimes have exposed themselves. But what I would like your audience to think about, and I know they're politically aware, and I'm sure they do this, is that what is it about Iran, despite all the horrible things that they hear about Iran, and I'm not saying Iran is a utopia, what is it about Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, that makes it stand up against genocide and makes it pay such a heavy price, it and its allies, and the collective West stands against it in support of genocide? what is it about this country? There must be something that's not so bad about it that makes it so determined to stand up against this. Iran could have cut a deal with the Americans a year ago. They could do it now. They could do it right now. I'm sure Trump would like to do a deal with Iran. He'd love to do a deal with Iran. Do you have any doubt that he would be willing to give Iran, Hezbollah, Yemen a lot just to stay away from Palestine, just to stop supporting the Palestinian people? But there isn't anything on this planet that he can give to the Iranians that would change their views on Palestine. And Iran is determined. It is determined to end this ethno-supremacy. It's not even an ethno-supremacist state. I keep saying it, but when they're from Europe, the Palestinians are the Semites. They're more Semite than anyone else. Even
Yeah.
those Zionists who come from the region, from Morocco and elsewhere, they're not Semites. So this mythological ethno-supremacist regime, Iran is determined that it will come to an end, and with the help of not just the axis of resistance, but the broader resistance, which includes many young Jews, many Christians, many older Jews, many Muslims, many people from all walks of life, Hindus, Buddhists. This regime will come to an end. And just to end on this note, our the grandson, just so that people have a bit of understanding, a contact of what influences Hezbollah, what influences Iran, what influences the resistance. The grandson of the Prophet, of Hussein ibn Ali, Imam Hussein, he was traveling to the city of Kufa because the people of Kufa were asking him to help liberate them from the despot, Yazid. On the way to Kufa, he was blocked. And he was told, and many of the people who sent those letters to him, they were forced by the regime at that time to stand against him. They mobilized through torture, murder, what despots do. Through torture, murder, and threats, they mobilized the population. They took them and they blocked Imam Hussein, and they told him to submit. And he said, never to submission, never to humiliation. Hayhat min adh-dhillah, never to humiliation. And that is a key element of Iranian culture. That is a key element of Hezbollah culture. That is a key element in Ansarullah and the broader resistance. Never to humiliation. And when Imam Hussein was martyred, his family, the children, the women were taken to Kufa, and the representative of Yazid tried to humiliate them. And the sister of Imam Hussein, whose name was Zainab, whose birth anniversary was just 4 days ago, he tried to humiliate the Imam Hussein's sister, and he said to her, how do you feel about what I think God did to your brother? And she said, I saw nothing but beauty. They were slaughtered, but she saw nothing but beauty, because resistance to this grave injustice is beautiful, regardless of what price you pay. Of course, you have to be realistic. You have to, be wise, but this resistance in Gaza, despite the fact that we see images of women and children being slaughtered, which prevent people from sleeping at night, and which disturb people when they wake up in the morning and throughout the day. Despite these horrific images, there is a beauty in the resistance, not just of those who fight in Hamas and Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad and Ansarullah and everyone else, but there's a beauty in the resistance of the women and children who remain steadfast under such circumstances, under such desperate circumstances. There's a beauty in the resistance of people in the United States who protest on campus and who protest on the streets. There's a beauty in resistance and the resistance that's taking place across the world in support of the Palestinian people, whether it's in um, South Korea or in Tokyo or in Seoul, or whether it's in London or wherever. There's a beauty in this resistance that I think is beyond any material beauty that we can see anywhere in the Amazon or elsewhere on this planet. So we will see this through, whether, whatever price we pay. There is no doubt that this region will not tolerate ethno-supremacism. And the people of Gaza, the people of West Bank will have to be, and the people, Palestinian people within the 1967 borders, they will have to be treated as equal human beings. This will be forced upon the regime in Tel Aviv. And the people of Palestine who've been expelled will go home. They will have that right. And I have no doubt that many young Jews who are at the forefront of this resistance in the West, these young Jews will be the ones who will be seen as key to this victory and key to this sea change in West Asia. But I have no doubt that we're going to see dark days ahead. And I have no doubt that we're going to be seeing a very dangerous standoff in the weeks and months ahead. But I am confident about the future. And I am confident that that more than enough people have become awake to the reality of what's going on.
Professor Marandi, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.